evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host tonight, Shantae Charles. I hope that you're having a great and wonderful day. It is Teachable Tuesday, and it is also the day of the passing of someone who was a profound gift to the world. So I want to take a moment as we begin our program tonight, and I want to just take a moment of silence to honor the life and to honor the work and to honor the ministry of Apostle Larry Hill. He touched so many lives in various ways, and I know he touched my life personally, and I just want to take a moment to just give a moment of silence as we remember his work and again his life and his ministry. Thank you for doing that with me. So this has been obviously some news that just came, and we are just going to continue to lift up his family and respect their wishes in terms of his legacy. I know that there will be some upcoming plans more than likely, but we just thank God for Apostle Hill, and we thank God for who he was and what he meant to the world. And I can say with a surety that I am doing probably what he would want most of us to be doing right now, and that is walking in our purpose, walking in our calling, and continuing to follow in the will and purpose and plan of God, to express ourselves in the way that God has called us to be expressive in the earth, and to do that with the mindset that what we're doing for Christ will last. So tonight we're going to go into looking at some Black poets as we continue to move through Black History Month. And then we're also going to just look at one woman on tonight. So we aren't going to be very long. We'll take about 30 to 40 minutes tops. And I want to start with this book called The Black Poets. It's a new anthology edited by Dudley Randall. And it's very, very powerful. There are some current Black poets in here. There are poets from all centuries in here. Black poets like Phyllis Wheatley and Paul Laurence Dunbar and James Weldon Johnston, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Jean Toomer, Gwendolyn Brooks, June Jordan, Don L. Lee, James W. Thompson, A.B. Spellman, Nikki Giovanni. So it is full of wonderful poetry, and I want to get into some of it tonight. I like how this book is broken down. It's supposed to be representation of a full range of Black American poetry, but I like the fact that it is broken into several sections, and we'll be just reading through some of them tonight. I have a few marked that I want to get to. But it starts out with folk poetry and what they call folk seculars, which are sort of words and poems and sayings that came out of the early time here in America. It came out of enslavement. Then he has a section called literary poetry from Lucy Terry, Phyllis Wheatley, Frances Harper, James Weldon Johnson, Paul Laurence Dunbar. And then he has a section on the Harlem Renaissance poets like Claude McKay and Jean Toomer, Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen. And then that section runs until he gets to the 1960s. And then it covers into the 1960s, and then it ends with the 1960s. So I really like this anthology because it kind of shows you that the themes are very much the same. It's really amazing as I started looking through here at some of the poems, and I thought about some of my own poetry and realized, wow, we have really been walking through some of the same things in our nation for so long that even as a poet or a writer or an artist, it's like as you create, your voice gets added to the chorus of Black life, the chorus of Black power, the chorus of Black pain and Black struggle. And when you begin to look on the poets of the past, you realize that this is a unique experience, and it's also a experience that unites you to a specific group and body of people, and that it's not just you that's been saying these things, which is why to me it's so important to look back on our elders who are paving the way, but also in that paving, they have left, what the scriptures calls landmarks. They've left a trail, and that trail helps you to mark what's already been said, what's already been done, what is even already owed to us as a people, and the fact that there is a written record of these things being hashed out from decade to decade, from century to century. And at some point, there is going to come a time where all things will be reconciled back to the Father. All things. All things. Today, right along with some of the poetry we're going to read, today, there was a verdict that came down. I always tell people February 22nd, if you look at world history, it's a very significant date for historical events that have taken place. And today marked the federal ruling in the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial, because he was murdered, where people looked past the tie and the suit and the glasses of the three white males, and they looked at their digital footprint. They looked at their history of hatred, and they decided, as I told people at the beginning when that murder of Ahmaud Arbery first happened, I put it on record that this was not an ordinary thing. This was not about who they didn't know. This was premeditated. And so, yes, they were charged today with a hate crime. Now, they're already going to prison for life, but this is going to be life sentence on top of life sentence. But I think it's important that for one of the rarest of times, 3 white men in America were charged with a hate crime and convicted and sentenced. That's historically significant. That from the federal level, they made that decision that yes, indeed, you were guilty. So I said to myself, how many white supremacists are going to go run to their digital media and to their text messaging and to their inbox messages and start trying to erase evidence? Because what got them in trouble was not their social media presence. What got them in trouble was their internal text messages to each other. So we do thank God for that victory in the trial, in that judgment on today. So this first poem is called Folk Poetry, Walk Together Children. Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, Don't you get weary. Oh, talk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Sing together, children. Don't you get weary. Sing together, children. Don't you get weary. Oh, shout together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Gwunter, mourn and never tire. Mourn and never tire. Mourn and never tire. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Oh, get you ready, children. Don't you get weary. Get you ready, children. Don't you get weary. We'll enter there, oh children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. This next, what they call folk secular, comes from Frederick Douglass's work, My Bondage and My Freedom, 1853. The song is, We Raised the Wheat. We raised the wheat, they give us the corn. We bake the bread, they give us the crust. We sift the meal, they give us the husk. We peel the meat, they give us the skin. And that's the way they take us in. We skim the pot, they give us the liquor and say that's good enough for the N-word. Again, our ancestors were very aware of how little they were getting out of this country. This is called From America by James M. Whitfield. America, it is to thee, thou boasted land of liberty. It is to thee I raise my song, thou land of blood and crime and wrong. It is to thee my native land, from which has issued many a band, to tear the black man from his soil and force him here to delve and toil. Chained on your blood-moistened sod, cringing beneath a tyrant's rod, stripped of those rights which nature's God bequeathed to all the human race, bound to a petty tyrant's nod because he wears a paler face. From America. This next piece and I want to make sure that it is the right name. This next piece is by Langston Hughes. It's called Justice. That justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we black are wise. Her bandage hides two festering sores that once perhaps were eyes. American heartbreak. I am the American heartbreak, the rock on which freedom stumped its toe, the great mistake that Jamestown made long ago. Words like freedom. There are words like freedom, sweet and wonderful to say. On my heartstrings, freedom sings all day, every day. There are words like liberty that almost make me cry. If you had known what I know, you would know why. And finally, the last poem that I'll be reading tonight is coming from James Emmanuel. It's called Negritude. Black is the first nail I ever stepped on. Black the hand that dried my tears. Black is the first old man I ever noticed. Black the burden of his years. Black is waiting in the darkness. Black the ground where hoods have lain. Black is the sorrow misted story. Black the brotherhood of pain. Black is a quiet iron door. Black the path that leaves behind. Black is a detour through the years. Black the diary of the mind. Black is Gabriel Prosser's knuckles. Black Sojourner's naked breast. Black is a schoolgirl's breathless mother. Black her child who led the rest. Black is the purring of a motor. Black the foot when the light turns green. Black is the last year's dusty paper. Black the headlines yet unseen. Black is a burden bravely chanted. Black cross of sweat for a nation's rise. Black is a boy who knows his heroes. Black, the way a hero dies. If you are a lover of poetry and you want to be introduced to some new poems, I highly recommend The Black Poets, an anthology compiled by Dudley Randall. It's available wherever books are sold. And finally, we're going to be looking at A Black Woman Did That, 43 boundary breaking, bar raising, world changing women. And tonight, the subject of our reading is dun 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 dun, Ms. Angela Davis. Angela Yvonne Davis. Angela Davis and her three siblings were raised by a mother who taught elementary school and a father who owned a gas station. They did well for themselves and their children, but life wasn't easy. The town they lived in, Birmingham, Alabama, earned the nickname Bombingham because of racial violence perpetrated by white supremacists and hate groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. The American neighborhood where they lived was even known as Dynamite Hill because attacks there were so common. Some of my earliest childhood memories are the sounds of dynamite exploding, she said in a speech. Homes across the street from where I grew up were bombed when they were purchased by black people who were moving into a neighborhood that had been zoned for whites. A white man named Robert Chambliss became known as Dynamite Bob for his role in the violence, including as many as 21 bombings in Birmingham alone. In 1963, he committed his most infamous act. Along with other Klan members, he bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 girls who were there for Sunday school. The girls were known to the Davis family. They all lived nearby. Violence was very much the norm, Angela recalled. But black communities in the South were unable to depend on law enforcement. So they organized themselves into militias to defend and protect their own families. Angela's father was a member of one of those armed patrols. Angela showed an ability to lead and a knack for organizing early on. While in high school, she organized her peers, black and white, into study groups to look at and discuss ways to fight racism. Local police would arrive to break up their gatherings, falsely accusing them of causing a disturbance. The young people were coming together across racial lines in peace, and their First Amendment right to peacefully assemble was being denied to them. When Angela was 15, she participated in an exchange program that placed black children from the South with white families in the North so they could attend school. She ended up at Elizabeth Irwin High School in New York City, where she says, "We read the Communist Manifesto and where we read Freud." She explained, "It was a high school that had been created by a number of teachers who had been blacklisted in the public school system because of their politics." After that, she studied French literature at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, spending her junior year in France at the prestigious university known as the Sorbonne. In her last year at Brandeis, she began to study philosophy, which led to a scholarship at a university in Frankfurt, Germany. She remained politically engaged while she was abroad, participating in demonstrations against the Vietnam War. Angela later completed her doctorate in philosophy. Back home in the United States, Angela sought out others who shared what she called her love for oppressed people. She joined a Communist Party and then the Black Panther Party. Both groups advocated for justice for those in society who suffered the most, the poor and people of color. Communists believed that fields, factories, mines, and machinery should be owned by the public and regulated by the government. Under communism, their goal was to distribute the wealth and resources of a country in an equal way. Capitalists, on the other hand, believe in private ownership and a more hands-off approach from the government with less regulation of business. In 1969, Angela began teaching at the University of California, Los Angeles. By all accounts, she was popular among her students, but after being accused of being a communist by an undercover FBI agent, she was fired. She went to court and got her job back, only to lose it again for using inflammatory language. She said later in interviews, One of the things that really impressed me when I was on the streets and fighting for my job was that whenever I spoke to black people, whenever I spoke in the black community, very few people had hang-ups about communism. In fact, many rather assumed that if she was drawing criticism, there might be something to it. Police brutality and bias against African Americans in the courts of law were a big problem in the 1960s, and that became the focus of her social justice work. Outspoken people of color, such as a young man named George Jackson, were especially targeted. They became political prisoners. Jackson had been sentenced to 1 year in life in prison, to 1 year to life in prison, after being accused of stealing $70 from a gas station. Rather than just do his time quietly, he continued to speak out against injustice. He was then accused of another crime, killing a prison guard during a riot. Angela got involved with his case. She worked with his family, particularly his brother Jonathan, who was also an activist. On August 7th, 1970, Jonathan showed up in a California courtroom with guns, demanding the release of his brother. He and 3 others were killed when shots were exchanged with police as he attempted to leave the courtroom with hostages. Angela was not in the courtroom, but guns used by Jonathan were registered in her name, so she was charged with the crimes herself. She went into hiding and was placed on the FBI's list of 10 most wanted fugitives. She herself became a political prisoner upon her arrest. Her family, including her sister Fania, launched a campaign to ensure justice for Angela. Free Angela was printed on buttons and posters that were worn and posted all over by her supporters in and out of the black community, and indeed all over the world. Now famous for her bravery, she became a powerful symbol of black pride. She sported the kind of huge, perfectly formed afro hairdo and wore the miniskirts that were the style of the day. Her striking appearance made her look like the revolutionary she was. Finally, after 20 months of struggle, the courts found her not guilty of any crime. The campaign to set her free was a victory. Later that year, she spoke on a California college campus for the first time since she was fired from one in 1970. She said, "The major problem we are confronting today is the problem of racism. Black and brown and Asian and Native have always been the first victims of oppression and repression. But I think that white people in this country, particularly white working people, should begin to understand that they too are exploited and they too can be victims of repression." Angela returned to teaching and writing, publishing books and papers, and continuing her activism. She remains a sought-after speaker and was named a co-chair of the Women's March on Washington after the inauguration of 2017. She said from the stage during that event, "At this very challenging moment in our history, let us remind ourselves that we, the hundreds of thousands of millions of women, people, men, women, and youth who are here at the Women's March, represent the powerful forces of change that are determined to prevent the dying culture of racism and heteropatriarchy from rising again. We recognize that we are collective agents of history and that history cannot be deleted like web pages." She remains a champion of the rights of the oppressed and continues to fight for the well-being of all people. All right. So that was our reading for tonight. If you have been listening by Anchor, I want to thank you tonight for your time and attention, and thank you for allowing me to honor Apostle Larry Hill, who has gone on to be with the Lord on today. If there is something that you would like to share tonight, you can log into the IG, and we've got about 15 minutes so we can have some discussion tonight. Again, if you're listening by Anchor, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you back tomorrow evening. Take care and good night. Good evening, Pastor Ben.
Good evening, Pastor Shante.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well today. Very well. all those poems were great, man. But the one that stuck out to me was Black.
Mm-hmm.
Because it ran through so many things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, concerning Black people. So that was the one that really grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that one, let me give you the name of that poet, because you probably find these online too, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, I forgot one. I have to read that one another time, probably tomorrow. This was by James Emmanuel. Yeah, it's called Negritude or Negritude.
Okay.
Negritude. Yeah, very powerful. It's amazing because as I was looking through some of the poems tonight, I was like, wow, so many of these are written almost as if we're in 2022. It's very like eerie.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the poems also are about Malcolm X. There are quite a few about his life and also about his assassination. If you're coming in, we're discussing the book, The Black Poets. Go ahead.
Well, see, that lets you know that America hasn't changed.
I mean, I was just
I mean,
floored.
if all these poets down the timeline through different decades and time periods
Mm-hmm.
are writing basically the same thing,
Yeah.
addressing the same issues,
Mm-hmm.
that lets you know that America as a country has not changed. I want to give a shout out to Pastor Dion.
Welcome, Pastor Dion. Thank you for joining us.
So that, and we both keep saying that though.
I know, but it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to like read from the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, 2000s, ancestors from different times, different ages, different genders, different upbringings, right? Different professions. Because all these people who are writing are not necessarily professional poets. It's just their words are gathered. And they're all saying pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
Like no justice, no peace, struggle, suffering, tyranny of white people. Like, yeah. It's pretty, it's one of those things where it's like, you understand the sacredness of the scriptural text, but there's also a sacredness in the record against tyranny. There's a sacredness that at some point these actions are going to be called into account. And you won't be able to say, well, we didn't know. It's like you didn't know. Because I think about that scripture, right? That talks about, it says, and the books were opened. That's always got me. Because the scriptures clearly lets us know it's not just talking about the book of life. There will be other books opened. There will be other records read for those who claim to not know how much tyranny and suffering and abuse that went on, because nations will be judged.
Right. I also want to give a shout out to a young lady that just came on. That's my cousin, Tracy Isaac. It says Isaac Tracy, but
welcome, Lady Tracy. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead.
But yeah, you're right. And I often have discussions about that. It's a matter of fact, this is one of the directions that God has me moving into. Because you're going to give an account for your hatred of his chosen people and the way you treated them.
Yeah.
You're not going to get out of that. See, and where there are some things that I've seen, some discussions I've had, and where we're at, Christ is ready to come, but he's given more time. See, he's ready. I mean, people may say, well, okay, there are things in the Bible that has to happen. Let's remember that God's time is not our time. See,
yeah, and I mean, if you have
right now,
if you have a clear interpretation of Scripture, you know that most things have been fulfilled.
Right.
Yeah.
Most things have been fulfilled. Yeah. So, but then most people don't have a right interpretation of Scripture. And then many people won't even go into Revelations. And actually, I taught from last night. I taught from the second Psalms, which was a prophecy concerning basically where we are now and what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So it's all. If you don't read Revelation, go into Psalms.
Yeah, Revelations 20:12. I just brought it up on my other phone here. It says, I'm gonna read it in the New Living Translation. I saw the dead, both great and small, standing before God's throne, and the books were opened, including the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. And see, and of course the other ones say, and there were open books, and one of them was the book of life. People keep talking about the book of life. I'm like, there are other books that will be opened.
Yeah.
Which is why, if you are called to writing, if you are called to documenting, make sure you walk in that part of your calling. I don't know if you've seen it. I don't want to get into it necessarily tonight, but Kanye West has put out a trilogy, or he's putting out rather in parts, a trilogy where he's documented the last 20 years of his life. And just this one guy who said he dropped everything else he was doing and decided to make it his purpose to stay with him on this journey of documenting his life. And I'm just watching it in amazement, because a lot of the things that he was saying, he's doing now. And I think the second part is supposed to come out tomorrow, but I don't want to get into it tonight. But I will say that there is something to be said for people choosing to go ahead and document their life and have faith enough to believe that what they have to share and what they have to say and what they have to write is important, even if nobody else sees the importance of what you're saying or writing or producing or doing at that time. So I do want to say that. And I think it's very important that, as we look at these Black people, icons, poets, looking at their early start, the things that were influencing them, all of those things matter, and I hope that one of the things we're getting from this month with all the readings is that everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And it's up to us whether or not we want to really take care of our own story, like be the steward over your own story.
Right.
Yes, God is writing it. God is leading you. He's guiding you, but also being a steward. What does that mean to be a steward over your own story? Things like documenting, things like writing things down, sharing with people around you, sharing with, you have grandchildren, sharing your story with your grandchildren, And so I just think about the whole piece of that. I was talking with my older brother today, and we started talking about our life and like all the craziness that we've been through, and talking about our mother's mental health, because right now she's not really in a good place. And I said to him, when he started sharing with me, he was literally saying the things that I had been thinking about why my mother has gone in the direction she's gone in mentally. And then I said to him, I said, if you look at how this country treats Black Americans, if you look at the ways in which we've been excluded from things, century after century, that has put us as a people behind. And when I say behind, I'm not saying that we're behind mentally. I'm not saying that we're behind skill-wise. I'm talking about access and opportunity. And you see all the things that have been done to push us out of or to exclude us from access and opportunity. I said, if you are a person that goes through consistent rejection all of the time, when you're trying to move forward, everybody does not make it through that kind of pressure. For some people, it can literally drive them crazy. Because it's like you're seeing, I'm doing everything I know to do to get out of this. It seems like a quagmire, like being pressed and pressed and pressed down. And that's literally what it's intended to do. But some people don't make it there. They don't make it beyond that. And we can't just keep saying, oh, it's because they didn't try. No, there are very real strongholds in this country that are designed to suppress the majority of Black people.
Yes.
And when I say majority, I'm talking like 85, 90%. The system is designed that way. And so when you see the 10% that make it out of that, and the 10% are paraded, as Antonio Moore calls it, he calls it the decadent veil. The 10% are paraded before you as if they are the 90% of Black America.
Right.
The people who are living in the 90% are like, but this is not what most of us are living. And so you really have to think about that. Like if you are in the 10% of Black people doing well, and that's a really exaggerated number, because it's not 10% of us doing well right now, by the way. It's about 2% of us, if we want to look realistically. If you're in that number and someone in the other number is telling you their experience of what's happening, and you keep saying to them, oh, but you just got to try harder. You just got to try harder. The reality is they are trying the hardest they can. But the system is not designed for all 100% of us to make it. It's really not. And so we have to start talking to people in the reality of what America is. We really do. I feel that. So
yeah.
Final thoughts, Pastor Ben.
Oh boy.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, as I keep saying, we have to wake our people up. We have to wake our people up, get them on the same page. As you said, about 80%, because all of them ain't coming. We have to get about 80% of our people on the same page, wake them up, get them to understand what's going on, get them to understand the power that we have.
Yeah.
You know, financially. Over $1 trillion spending dollars a year. And nobody else is coming close to that. No other group is coming close to that. I mean, come on. That's our power. Yeah. And if we come together and use that, you know, I mean, wow.
Oh, capitalism. They understand They understand capitalism. That's what America. Yeah. That's what America runs on. America doesn't run on communism. It runs on capitalism.
Yes. Oh, one more thing. Speaking of that, and I'm done. I was watching a video today where this young black doctor got a check for $16,000, went into a Chase bank to cash it, spoke to officers and all that stuff, and they told her that she couldn't do it because the check was suspicious. They had all the information they needed. All it would have taken was a phone call to the company to understand, okay, did y'all write this check? Yeah, we wrote it. That's all it would have taken.
But again, it goes back to what the financial institutions already know. And that is the vast majority of us are not doing well. So that's why it was suspicious.
Not only that, Chase Bank is actually one of the banks that was tied to financing slavery.
Yeah. I tell people that often. I'm like, just go research the banks, the origin of the banks that were involved in slavery, and then please get your money out of those and put it somewhere else. Try a credit union. But yeah, the majority of these banks, their baseline, their reserves came directly from the slave trade. Same thing with a lot of the life insurance companies, because they were insuring us. But yeah, Pastor Ben, I want to thank you for your insights tonight. Thank you for sharing, and thank you all for your time and attention, for stopping over and reading with us and listening to our dialogue as a result of our reading tonight. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host tonight, Shantae Charles. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So continue to go out and be what, Pastor Ben?
Light.
Be light. Take care, everyone, and God bless.